Okay, I'm going to ask you something for right now. Raise your hand, proud and strong, if you're not here as part of AHAC. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so in planning for this talk, my guess was that this was going to be the crowd. And so rather than planning a talk that was really aimed at the public, what I was really going for was a talk that was really going to have closure for the Eclipse Ballooning project. And I know not all of you here for AHAC participated in the Eclipse Ballooning project. So my apologies to you if you didn't participate, because that's really what this talk is going to be geared toward. You'll get a feel for what we did with the Eclipse Ballooning project if you didn't already during all of the different talks today. So I'm not going to totally leave out what we did, but for the most part, I want to really provide this opportunity where we have come back together, most of these teams from the Eclipse Ballooning project, and just reflect on that a little bit and what we accomplished. So to get started today, I wanted to take the opportunity to practice what I preach a little bit, and that is I've been doing a lot of thinking about learning and communication. And in fact, one of my idols right now is Alan Alda. And those of you who are young people in the audience, you're going, okay, Alan Alda, who the heck is Alan Alda? But if you've ever heard of the program MASH, right, he's Hawkeye from MASH. So there you go, that's Alan Alda. And after that, Alan actually got really interested in communicating science, and he did the Scientific American Frontier Show for 11 years, and he has now founded the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science. And this is something I've really been thinking a lot about, and he has this great new book called Would I Have This Look on My Face If I Understood You? And I've really been thinking a lot about what he has to say, and one of the things that I really identify with is identifying with your audience. And one of those things is that really to identify with your audience is really to have a conversation with them. And so I'm going to try and practice what I preach and start today with a tug of war. So first we're going to practice the tug of war, and also part of this is imagination. So Einstein is another one of my idols, right? And Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge. And I really, really believe in that. So we're going to not only practice some communication, but some imagination. Okay, so I want you all to imagine a big old rope, okay? So I have one end of the rope, and you have the others. So everybody in the audience grab the other end of the rope, okay? Ready? First, I want you to pull. Okay, now I'm going to pull. Okay, good job. Now here's the tug of war. So the first tug of war is me pulling. Awesome. And this is, I just want you to think a little bit about what it took to get you here today. And so this is kind of a yoga thing if you're into yoga, but I want you to kind of let go of, you know, the long day at AHAC today, of what it took you to travel here today, and the weather outside, etc. And just kind of let that go and enjoy this time to reflect. Now, the other end of the tug of war is that on the flip side of that, letting go, I also want you to think a little bit about what you did to get here today. You know, how did you get invited to come to this conference? What did you do? What did you participate in? What did you experience to get you here? And how did that change your life? And just to think about that and enjoy this sense of closure that I hope I might facilitate you in. Okay, ready? All right, but the fact of the matter is I have the microphone, so I win. Okay, so thank you for that tug of war. I wanted to just take a moment and describe kind of how the project came about. Some of you have heard the story about how the Eclipse Ballooning project came about, but not everyone has. And so how it all started really is I was sitting at my desk one day doing my morning perusal of the news, and I came across this news story about a group who had done a crazy thing, and during a really short duration, narrow path eclipse in November 2013, did the really crazy thing of hiring a pilot who was able to get them in just the right place at just the right time to be able to see totality from an airplane. And it really got me to thinking, as I was supposed to be planning, this was just like a week before we were taking 70 people from Montana and from across the country to see the Mars Maven launch at Kennedy Space Center. And so I was thinking about this a little bit, and Burke came into my office, and I was like, hey, Burke, you know, this is really cool. Do you know what this pilot did? He got the plane in just the right place, and it was all this huge news story about what the eclipse looked like from this plane. And if it was cool from the plane, man, what would it look like from a balloon? That would be really cool. And I remember Burke just looked at me and he's like, Angela, aren't you supposed to be planning for this, you know, huge trip? You're taking 70 people to Kennedy, you know, next week. Yeah, Burke, but I'm really excited about what we could do with ballooning. You know, I had just gotten done doing this big national survey for NASA about the different suborbital hands-on projects that were involved in space grants, so ballooning and CubeSats, et cetera. And so I knew that there were about 150 active high-altitude ballooning programs, academic programs around the country. And I thought, oh man, if we could get all of those different groups together and do ballooning for this eclipse that's coming in 2017, then that would be really, really fantastic if we could do that together in a coordinated way. And then kind of the next thought was, you know, if we could do that coordinated, you know, in this day and age, people only really care about what's going on now. They're not going to care about, well, maybe the scientists and interested ballooning people at AHAC would be interested in what video you would capture after the eclipse and showing interesting footage. But for the majority of the public, they were only going to care like during that 90-minute window of the eclipse. So if we really want to capture the public imagination and provide this really amazing viewpoint, actually looking down on the Earth and having that amazing perspective of not just looking up at an astronomical phenomenon, but actually looking down and seeing the curvature of the Earth and the blackness of space, we needed to do it live. And so this really kind of captivated my imagination. I started thinking about how we might be able to go about this. And of course, I knew that we were going to need some money to be able to do this. And so I set about trying to convince NASA to help us do this project. And of course, we had no idea how to do it. We had no idea how to achieve this phenomenon of live streaming. And remember, this is like 2 years before the first, you know, social media live streaming. 2 years before YouTube Live and Facebook Live, or actually like 3 years before Facebook Live. So nobody was even thinking about live streaming at that time. And so everybody called me crazy, right? And they were probably right. It probably was a little bit crazy. But it just really captivated my imagination, and I set about convincing NASA. And so actually met in February of 2014 with NASA folks, and they kind of kindly sat around the table and said, we don't have any money, go away. But nevertheless, I presented the idea at the National Space Grant meeting in DC, and I think started to get a little bit of traction. And I mean, I don't want to talk to you about politics, but really there was this huge shift happening in education, specifically in the Science Mission Directorate. And so I met with them in February, and they're like, no, we don't have any money. That's because this huge change was happening, and they announced this great opportunity actually for doing really key involved activities. And to make a long story short, I tried again about 6 months later, and things had changed, and I had caught the attention of a few people who thought there was some traction. And started to get some traction in doing that. And again, at that time, I was gaining traction for funding at the same time as, you know, we were kind of madly trying to figure out how could we possibly live stream from balloons. So just a few of the challenges. There were many, many challenges. Obviously, technology was one. We had no idea how we're going to do this. So there were some early thoughts. We were starting to maybe think about partnering with Google Loon, and started that partnership that we continued very strongly throughout the project. and thought, oh, okay, Google Loon, they're providing internet between balloons and down to the ground in third world countries, so, and their goal is to do this by 2017, so great, we'll use the internet that's being provided by the Google Loon balloons, that'll be great. But it became pretty clear that it wasn't gonna be ready in time, that Google wasn't gonna make that, and then we thought, oh, well, airplanes have a great, go-go in-flight. We can provide that. Well, that was really, really expensive and really, really heavy, and so lots of different ideas about how the heck we could figure out the technology. And of course, we have the weight considerations. I don't have to tell you guys about that, and cost. Even though I was coming to the point where we might have an opportunity to have some funding from NASA, we still were going to be on a very shoestring budget. The regulations, you heard Burke talk about, we have to make sure we're staying with the FAA regulations. And we also knew, of course, that within this narrow path, every possible airworthy aircraft was going to be in the air at that time. So not only were we going to have this event where we were going to put a lot of balloons up, but also there was going to be an extra amount of air traffic. Bureaucracy. That was probably the second hardest thing on this list was bureaucracy, and just figuring out the funding and the whole politics behind trying to work that out. The massive collaboration, everybody thought we were crazy, but you all and your space grant leaders believed in us and believed that we could take this on, and to be able to coordinate that and think about how we're gonna do that massive collaboration was a huge challenge. And time, even though when we started this, people are like, oh, honestly, NASA had not even started thinking about the Eclipse at that time. And so it seemed like it was so far down the road. But yeah, at the same time, because we were dealing with the technology issues, time was a huge, huge challenge. And the pressure, just the pressure that we took on ourselves to do this and to achieve this, which is somewhat self-imposed, but that was also a challenge. And just kind of on a personal note, but really more broad, is in all these challenges we have to also remember that we're human, right? There's always, there's a saying like, there's 3 important things in life. The first is to be kind, the second is to be kind, and the third is to be kind. Because everybody's always dealing with something, right? So this is the picture of my then 3-year-old in June 2016 between the 2 workshops. He had huge, massive issues that we didn't know what was going on. He had 2 emergency surgeries. I had to drive him down to Salt Lake Children's Hospital. It's crazy. This is all happening right in the middle of the workshops. So that's just a personal story for me, but of course, everyone is dealing with something. You have to remember that the personal side of what's going on too, and that's a challenge you have to remember. Nevertheless, we persevered, and this for me, I don't know for other people, but this for me is one of the reasons that kept me going, this statistic. So the National Science Foundation, every year, they ask a series about 5 questions that they know are common misconceptions in science. And every 5 years or so, they repeat those questions. And so this question has been asked actually for about 25 years, every 5 years. Does the Earth go around the sun, or does the sun go around the Earth? And this is the data from the 2014 survey. And it shows that 26% of the American public thinks that the sun goes around the Earth. Which is just astounding. And I've had, in giving this statistic in different talks, I've had lots of people come up to me and say, Angela, that can't possibly be true. Show me the data. And I'm prepared for that question, and I give them the link and show them the data. And this is true, right? But again, I kind of bring it back to like the idea about learning and Einstein about imagination. And if you think about the average, person, say like in inner city Chicago, and they, walk to school every day, and what do they see? They see the sun coming up and the sun going down. And if they were really tired because they struggled to get to school and they had no breakfast that morning, so on the day where the lesson where they show the little diagram of the sun in the middle and the planets going around, they were really tired from life, etc., and they weren't really paying attention, engaging their imagination. It never really sunk in, right? That even though their brain tells them that the sun goes around the Earth, in fact, that's not what happens. And so this for me, I knew that not having a total solar eclipse in the US, in the continental US for like 40 years, and thinking about how different the US was back in 1979, that this is gonna be a huge opportunity to just get people thinking about their basic cosmic environment, about just opening their eyes to wonder and thinking about, like an eclipse, like the moon is moving in front of the sun, and what is happening. And so this kept me going. I don't know if it kept anybody else going, but it kept me going. So ultimately, we figured out the technical details after, huge thanks to lots of people working together, and I don't have to go into detail. Usually with other audiences, right, I have to kind of describe how this all works, but I don't have to describe this to you guys. But ultimately, we got everything to function, and then it became time to teach everybody how to use what we did. And so the next, major challenge was the workshops. And so as many as you know, we had a practice workshop in May, which is great because people who couldn't come in July came in May, and it gave us a chance to figure out how we're going to do this with a big crowd. And that really set off a year of practicing and testing and practicing and testing, and lots of frustration, right? How many of you were frustrated in that year in between? Yes, go ahead and raise your hand. Now picture a rotten tomato in your hand, a big old juicy rotten tomato. Now take all your frustration and throw it at me. Throw it at me. All right, awesome. Okay, now hopefully that's out of your system. But really, I mean, as you maybe have had a chance, and maybe you have recovered enough from the eclipse, but I think it's really true that sometimes it's the things that are the most difficult that are the most rewarding. And also, it's the failures of the equipment or the things that you learned. If we had offered you something at the workshop that you went home and it worked perfectly, every time you took it out and practiced with it and it worked perfectly, would you really understand how that system worked? And if all of a sudden there was an issue on Eclipse Day, how to fix it and how to use it? No. And I'm not telling you that we created you issues on purpose, but that's part of doing any kind of tricky project. And it's all of those challenges that I described earlier, and all that practicing, that's where really all the learning came from, right? If it was an easy, simple thing that wasn't pushing the bounds, it never would have had the impact that it did. So, we did lots of practicing after we trained everybody, and then we had the result.
Get ready. Get ready.
Ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So that was a summary of the results. And oh, look at that, there's no text.
Get ready.
Ready? 5,
Oh.
4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, let's try that again. Oh, really? All right. Okay, I'm not sure why the text doesn't show up here, but I mostly have these statistics in my mind. I wanted to just give you a flavor of, we were part of this obviously much huger NASA effort for the Eclipse, and what doesn't appear here is that this was by far the biggest digital event that NASA ever did, actually that the US federal government has ever done. In fact, it was so big that it was 7 times bigger than the next biggest digital event they had ever done, which was New Horizons at Pluto. Yeah, 7 times bigger. And their reach, basically the reach of number of people who observed through NASA content was on par with the number of people who watch a Super Bowl every year. The estimated people who viewed the NASA TV content, whether they viewed that online or through NASA TV, was 600 million people. And the number of people who they had on their social media accounts, it's a little bit difficult for them to separate unique users, but they had 5 billion non-unique users interacting on social media with the Eclipse. And so it was just a huge, huge event. And actually, the University of Michigan did a really careful scientific study to look at how many people observed the eclipse, either with their own eyes or with online content or TV content. 88% of the American public viewed the eclipse in some way. And that's just astounding that it really had that big of an impact. And you probably saw the, President and the First Lady viewing the eclipse. Oh, look, there it is. Here we go. So here's what I just said. Oh, and here's where we come in, right? We were part of the live views, so more than 60 million unique views of the live streams. So it's just an amazing reach. I wanted to just give a little bit of information about our reach in particular. You have your question? Yeah, I'll send you these slides and that video that you can use. And so that data that I prepared for you is from Kristen Erickson, who's in charge of this big science mission directorate. She was basically like in charge of the whole NASA Eclipse effort. And that's from a presentation she did about a month ago. They're in the process of doing a little bit more careful, like exact number counting. So that data is a little bit preliminary. So if there's better data, I will send that to you as well. But I'll send you the slides. But I just wanted to give you a feel of the kind of measures of our project. So there were really four main goals of our project that we set out to do. One was public reach. The second one was develop partnerships and really just strengthen and raise the bar of the academic ballooning community in general. And the third one was student workforce development, so student hands-on opportunities. And the fourth one was science. So I'm going to kind of just talk briefly about the results of each of those. So here's just a flavor of the public reach. So we don't know exactly how many people saw live views of the total solar eclipse. We're still kind of trying to gather that data, but we do know we were part of that NASA TV broadcast and all of those pieces like Colleen Fava. You can actually go and view the NASA TV broadcast piece, and Colleen is highlighted in there from the Saluki Stadium part with NASA Edge. That's really fantastic. But 60 million views of that content, and we were a big part of that content. But there was lots of other local and national stories that happened as well, and this is part of the data that we're still collecting. But here's just an example. Here's Garrett, our student. Is Garrett in here? They're bowling, I think. They've heard me give this talk. But here's Garrett on page A3 of the Wall Street Journal, right? To have a student be, the beginning section of the Wall Street Journal is pretty crazy, and there's just all kinds of stories on, and we had TV crews, much to the chagrin of many of our students and Burke and Randy, TV crews coming to film with us for the Science Channel and Discovery Channel. So just really fantastic media coverage. This is part of, for those of you who are ballooning teams, this is part of some of the data we're still gathering to ascertain really what our total public reach was. So this is just another plug to do those reports so we can tell the story accurately. Is there a question?
I was just going to ask if you wanted us to send all the media coverage.
Yes, in your report, I asked for the links and the reach of each thing, because NASA actually wants that data. They want to know what publication you are in and the average reach of that publication. That's what they're asking from me. So that's what I'm asking for you, is to list every one that you know. And as far as partnerships goes, this is a really rewarding part of what we did actually. In doing all of this, we were pushing the bounds and asking for help from all the big ballooning companies in the US. And I think we can pretty much safely say that for every major ballooning company in the US, we have some kind of relationship with now. And here's just a few highlights. In particular, Worldview had us out to do several practice flights. Loon, like many of you guys got balloons that Google Loon donated. They donated us hundreds of balloons. And Raven, again, with practice flights and all kinds of things. And there's lots of different smaller companies that aren't up here. So the partnerships that created opportunities that will continue into the future was a huge success. The students, for me personally, this is the most important, is to look at all of you students out there who participated in this project and to think about the experiences that you have told me about, or that I could even imagine, and how this changed your life, whether it be just changed your academic career or even farther into the future, is hugely rewarding for me. Just a little bit about the science. So really, the Eclipse Ballooning project was two main pieces. It was the live streaming piece, and that was the atmospheric science piece. Unfortunately, we just didn't end up talking as much about the atmospheric science piece. But really, in the long term, what might be the most exciting part, actually, is the atmospheric science that's going to come out of that, out of the radiosonde effort. And I just wanted to give you a little flavor. I'm not going to talk too much science here, but this is a graph that Burke made of 3 of the different balloons that we flew. We flew a couple others, but I thought this was fantastic. So the red curve is a typical flight profile of a standard sounding balloon that goes up and pops and comes back down. So for most of you, that's what your profile probably looked like on Eclipse Day. But the green curve is, so we actually had a partnership. We had the gentleman who runs the company's space data, and he does hundreds of launches with the military and all kinds of things. He had a capability of having a float balloon, and he flew a couple of our different experiments. Anyway, so you can see here that he put the balloon up early, and it was floating. And I think it's really interesting. You can see that just about 45 minutes before totality, so totality is that gray band, it starts to lose altitude because the atmosphere was cooling. And then after totality, it cooled a little bit longer, but then it came back up and rose back up after it warmed up. And so even just looking at the flight profiles, there's interesting information there about the effect of the eclipse. And please enjoy Catherine Stocker's talk tomorrow morning. She'll talk about, there's really kind of 3 key pieces to the analysis of this atmospheric science, and she'll talk about one of the, as they described, it's like a 3-legged stool, and she'll talk about one legs of the stool tomorrow in her talk. And then, of course, you all heard about the space biology experiment, so I won't go into any more details about that. And then one of the big things, when I ask students or, everybody about what was your, favorite thing about the eclipse, they know that I'm asking about the project, and so they'll tell me something about the project, but if they're really being honest, really one of their favorite things was seeing the eclipse itself. And so I think this is actually a huge result, too, is that you could ask yourself the question, would I have gone to the eclipse path if it weren't for the project. Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't, but just exposing so many people to having the chance to see a total solar eclipse was awesome. So I'd like to just kind of close with a series of extended thank yous. And I know most people, let me just tell you something really quick, a little piece of advice. Most of you, if you're like me and people are in a conference or something and they're saying thank yous, but you weren't involved in the organization or anything, then you're like, oh my God, the person is going on and on and on about thank yous, and this means nothing to me. Please take a moment to remember that those thank yous aren't really for you as the audience. They're for the person who has to recognize all that went into that. And so I'm going to give you, a little bit of an extended thank you here, which will mean something to many of you, but if it doesn't mean anything to you, just please be patient with me. But before I get into thanking to all these people, I just wanted to kind of say like a personal thank you for believing in us, and for those of you who invested money with your space grants, or if you decided to participate as a faculty advisor or a student, for believing and putting your time and energy into this. So on with the medical issues. So this is actually a picture of my hand giving a thumbs up 4 days before the eclipse when I had to have an emergency surgery. And I was just like bawling in tears because I thought at that time that I might not make it to see totality. And that was just crazy, but I made it. And so that was good. But thank you to all the students who put your time and effort, especially the Montana Space Grant students and the leadership students. It's a huge thank you to all of you who invested so much time and energy into this. And the advisors and the Space Grants Consortia, the leadership there, a huge thank you. Of course, to our leadership team, so James Flatten described this morning a little bit more about their huge involvement. And this is a picture of that January morning in 2016 that he described, where everybody on the leadership team came to Montana and were testing all the systems and freezing cold out on the deck of the lab. But a huge thank you to the leadership team. And a huge thank you to, of course, the Montana Space Grant staff and students. So we didn't always stay sane during this whole process. So the picture with the boxes, we had, and I think this might actually be a little bit of an underestimate, but when we were kitting all the parts for the workshops, we estimated something like 40,000 parts. Like we kitted 40,000 parts. So all those materials had to come in to our office and then get sorted and counted and labeled and bagged and craziness. And anyway, at one point, all these boxes came in and I'm like, this looks like a snowman. And so we made a snowman and we were a little crazy. And then Burke, at one point when we were trying to figure out different ideas for what the payload containers would be, someone convinced him to put it on his head because it looked like a crazy alien. So we might have gone a little crazy, but it was a huge team effort, and it wasn't always easy, but we did it, and I'm hugely grateful, especially to all of the students as well. We asked a really a lot of our students, and that was tough at times, but huge. I hope the students that participated in helping lead everything recognize at some point how beneficial, hopefully, it was for them. And then I just wanted to say, too, that kindly our huge efforts haven't gone unnoticed. So this is actually a picture, not a very good picture, of an award we won. The first ever special service award given by the National Space Grant community. So there's a sister award called the Distinguished Service Award that Space Grant gives every year to big national profile people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye the Science Guy and Neil Armstrong, who've won that sister award, and they actually created this award to be given not annually, but as is warranted, a special service award within the Space Grant community, which was hugely meaningful to us. So just a thank you for that. So this is a question I get asked all the time. What's next? 2024 or chilly 2019? And I think my answer is typically, you know, I'm not sure. One of the things that was really great about what we did, I think, this year was that we were really pushing the bounds on technology. Doing the live streaming was something that was really cool and interesting to the students who participated. But let me tell you, in 2024, if we do the exact same thing, nobody will care, right? Because everybody will be live streaming and technology will have changed and the students won't be interested in participating. And so what will be the really interesting thing that students want to participate in 2024? I don't know. You know, maybe the technology between now and then is going to change enough that we don't know now what the really interesting thing to do would be. You know, is there some really interesting collaborative science that technology will allow us to do? But I'm almost even getting ahead of ourselves because we're not really done with 2017. There are really key pieces. There's presenting the results. So in order to really fulfill this project, we need to dot all of our I's and cross all of our T's as far as reporting what we did. You know, if we don't tell everybody what we did and what our results were, then we might as well not have done it. So we have some presentations coming up at professional conferences. There's an evaluation. So Irena Grimberg, who is here and has spoken to you, has talked about the evaluation she's doing at this meeting. Students, please, please do that. The more evidence that we have of the effect of the program, the better opportunity we have to do something like this next time, whether it's 2024 or some other opportunity. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the reports. I know, like, the last thing everybody wants to do is create a report, but please put your time and effort into those reports, because then aggregating that and telling that story back to NASA will just amplify what it is that we are able to accomplish. And then lessons learned. Probably you all have your own individual things that you've learned, and you know, we have our things that we've learned, and so just thinking about all of that and sharing that, and then, you know, who knows, 2024 or who knows. Obviously, we're going to share some ideas tomorrow for what might happen in the academic community, and I don't know what will happen. You know, use your imagination. Imagination is definitely more important than knowledge. So that's all I'd like to share with you today, but I'd like to definitely open it up if anybody has any questions. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask? It's almost 9 o'clock at night. All right, here we go. Yeah. Yeah, so a question about the curvature. So it really depends on the camera, right? So with the, you know, Raspberry Pi cameras, depending on the angle and how they looked, and some of the footage there are GoPro cameras, and GoPros actually distort things. And so if you're looking at the horizon, it actually makes it look like it has a little bit more curvature than it does. But then if you change your angle, then it actually looks like it goes the other way. So it all has to do like with the optics of the camera that's being used. Yeah, but if you didn't mess with any optics, right, and you just had a camera that didn't change any curvature at the height where we were, well, many people were with those balloons, where you can go with academic altitude ballooning, you can actually see the curvature of the Earth. And let me tell you, actually, this is really interesting. Through like design fairs or different public events that we've done, we have brought out the flat earthers like none other. So I was talking about, you know, we have the space biology people who tell me I'm a psychopath, but also we've had the flat earthers like, you know, you can't really see the curvature, you know, of the Earth because it's not curved, you know. So that's been interesting. Yeah.
As someone so immersed in the eclipse, what surprised you on the day? What happened that you weren't prepared for?
So there were two things really I think that surprised me. So, you know, obviously I'd seen lots of images of the eclipse, but I was kind of two frames, like, okay, well, obviously people take these pictures with really fancy cameras, and so what I'm going to see with my own eyes isn't going to be nearly as cool as what I'm seeing in these pictures, right? But on the other hand, I also know that obviously you can't always capture with a camera what your eyes can see, like in sunsets or whatever. It's never as cool. And so I was kind of back and forth about what I was going to see. I'd never seen a total solar eclipse before. And so when I did see, and I just had a simple pair of binoculars during totality that I was looking at the sun with as well, but it really blew me away, like how phenomenally cool it was and how much structure you could see. So my background's in solar physics, like how much structure you could see in the corona, that you could see all the prominences so well. I think that was crazy for me. So that was interesting. The other thing that was interesting was just how cold it got. So it was a pretty warm day where we were in Idaho, and like when the sun was only like halfway covered, we're all putting on sweatshirts and stuff. And I thought it would get cool during totality, but that it got cool so earlier. So I mean, I think that's probably, you're all nodding, yeah, that similar experience. That was my experience as well. Yeah, Greg.
Angela, what's your assessment as to how much this program has changed NASA's perception or increased its awareness of space grant and ballooning? Internal to NASA.
Yeah, I think I'm really a modest person. So it's hard for me to say this, but I think it's really been substantial. In my role as vice chair of the Council of Space Grant Directors, I've been interacting a lot with Mike Kincaid, our current acting administrator for NASA education, and he really talks about the Eclipse project a lot, and in other interactions and options that it's opened within the Science Mission Directorate, et cetera, and just the national attention that it got. I think it really has been a pretty profound impact. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you again, everyone who participated and for listening. And I don't know if James wants to talk. I was just going to say, have a good evening and see you in the morning, but I don't know if James has comments.
So thank you again, Angela. As I mentioned earlier in the day, it's a long day. Tomorrow will not be quite so long for those of us at this conference. But if you have not seen the documentary Blast, my students, all sitting back in the back row there, are willing to show it to you. But they won't show it if nobody's going to show up. Actually, they might. I don't know if they'll show it for themselves. But is there anybody who might be interested actually in going and seeing a movie right now? I know it's been a long day, so I'm not really expecting a grand show of hands, but I don't see any hands, and I'm okay with that. Okay, I'll tell you what Blast is about. I forget what it stands for. Somebody probably could tell me. Greg, do you know what? Do you remember what Blast stands for? It's B-L-A-S-T. The B is for balloon. Anyway, okay, it's a telescope. It's a balloon-borne telescope that flies on a big balloon. And in the course of the movie, I won't spoil it for you, but they fly it more than once. First, they fly it out of Sweden and land it in northern Canada, so they fly it across the ocean. And then later, they fly it in Antarctica, and they have a very interesting time. And for those of us who do what I call small-scale ballooning, the people who watch you do ballooning may not think your balloons are small, but compared to these balloons, what we do is pretty small stuff. It's a very, very interesting project. And so this is not too different from what Greg Guzik does with his HASP, as far as the size of the balloons at least. But this is a single payload that weighs 2,000 pounds and is bigger, bigger than the people who are working on it. And they have some real challenges. And the brother of the man who was running the project was a filmmaker, and so he went along with them for a couple of years, I think, and made a documentary. It's an excellent movie. It's just a really late night. Greg.
Yeah, so I should add a little bit onto this. So HASP is actually small
Okay.
compared to some of these balloons. These balloons, these are the true scientific balloons that you have. These balloons that they use down there in Antarctica would fill a football stadium. Okay, and so these are massive structures. Flying from Antarctica is an interesting experience in of itself, and creates some very special problems. Like, for example, all the roads are made out of
Question? I'm sorry? She wants to see a trailer? Oh, can you see it other than tonight? When were you thinking? Tomorrow night?
See the movie in a trailer.
You know, I could do that. So here's what I'm going to do. This is not the location I was going to show this film. We were going to show it in a different building because I don't have this place reserved for after about 12 minutes. But hey, we got 12 minutes. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up Blast right now and just show you a little tiny bit of it. You don't have to stay, but if you're at all interested in maybe even watching it, stick around. Within the next 12 minutes, probably less, I will show you a little bit of Blast. Other than that, thanks again, and I will see you in the morning.